Margaret Richardson stood in her $20,000 designer dress, pointing toward the door with a manicured finger. "Pack your things and get out. We don't need some uneducated woman raising our children." What she didn't expect was her 6-year-old son Oliver stepping between them, shouting, "If Grace leaves, we leave too." The marble foyer of the Richardson mansion fell silent except for the ticking of the antique grandfather clock. Margaret's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the shock spreading across her face as she stared down at her son, who had positioned himself protectively in front of Grace Williams. The woman who had been caring for the Richardson children for the past 3 years, Grace Williams, 34 years old, stood frozen in the doorway leading from the kitchen. Her dark hands still held the flour-dusted apron she had been wearing while preparing the children's favorite chocolate chip cookies. For 3 years, she had poured her heart into caring for Emma, Oliver, and little Sophie Richardson, treating them as her own children. The conversation that had shattered Grace's world had taken place 20 minutes earlier. Grace had been in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared afternoon snacks. When she heard Margaret's voice from the sitting room where she was having tea with her friend Victoria Pemberton. "The woman is becoming a problem, Victoria," Margaret had said with disdain. "The children have become far too attached to her. It's inappropriate and concerning." Victoria's response had been equally chilling. "Oh darling, you must establish boundaries immediately. These people need to understand their place. They're the help, not family members." "Exactly," Margaret had continued. "Emma actually called her Mama Grace yesterday. Can you imagine? My own daughter calling the nanny Mama. It's disgusting." Grace had felt her heart stop. She remembered that precious moment when Emma had fallen and scraped her knee, reaching for Grace in her pain. It had been one of the most beautiful moments of Grace's life. And Richard agrees. Victoria had asked. "Richard barely notices what happens with the children. He's too busy with mergers to concern himself with domestic matters. But when I explained the situation, he agreed completely. We need someone who will maintain proper boundaries." That conversation had led to this devastating confrontation. "Oliver, get away from her right now," Margaret hissed. "Come to Mummy this instant." But Oliver didn't move. At 6 years old, he possessed a stubborn streak that today became his greatest strength. Tabor declared with conviction. "Grace makes us feel safe when thunderstorms come at night. Grace knows our favorite stories by heart. Grace never forgets to cut the crusts off my sandwiches because she remembers I don't like them." 8-year-old Emma appeared at the top of the staircase, drawn by the commotion. Her school uniform was wrinkled from playing in the garden with Grace, her blonde hair adorned with daisies that Grace had helped her weave into a crown. When Emma saw the scene below, her eyes filled with tears. "What's happening? Why is Mummy being mean to Grace? I am your mother." Margaret snapped, her composure cracking. "Not some woman we pay to watch you." Emma ran down the stairs, her shoes clicking against the marble. "But Grace is the one who holds us when we have nightmares. Grace teaches us about being kind to animals. Grace tells us stories about being brave. Grace loves us even when we make mistakes." The weight of Emma's words hit Margaret like physical blows, but she was too proud to acknowledge the truth. Richard Richardson emerged from his office, loosening his tie after another exhausting day of negotiations. At 42, he measured success through stock portfolios and bank accounts. The emotional scene in his foyer was unexpected. "What's all this noise about?" he demanded, taking in his wife pointing dramatically, his children clustering around the nanny, and Grace looking devastated. "I'm firing her," Margaret announced casually. "The children have become too attached. It's inappropriate and unprofessional." Richard nodded absently, reaching for his phone. "Fine, whatever you think is best. Grace, I assume you can be packed and gone by morning. We'll provide a reference letter, assuming you leave quietly." That's when 4-year-old Sophie toddled into the foyer, clutching her stuffed elephant that Grace had given her for her birthday. The little girl's blonde curls bounced as she walked, her blue eyes wide with confusion. Sophie had been napping, but the raised voices had woken her. "Grace, are you sad? Why is everyone angry? Did I do something bad? Grace knelt down to Sophie's level, her heart breaking as she looked into those innocent eyes. For 3 years, she had been the one to soothe this child's tears, to sing her to sleep, to bandage scraped knees. I have to go away, sweetheart, Grace said softly, fighting back tears. But I want you to know that I love you very much. I love all 3 of you more than all the stars in the sky. No, Sophie shrieked, throwing her arms around Grace's neck. Don't go, please don't go. I need you to sing the elephant song. I need you to make my smiley face pancakes. Sophie's desperate crying awakened something protective in Emma and Oliver. They rushed to Grace's side, wrapping their arms around her protectively. She can't leave, Emma declared with unexpected strength. Grace is more our mum than you are. Grace knows I like my toast cut into triangles. Grace knows I'm scared of the vacuum cleaner. Grace knows I want to be a veterinarian to help animals. The words hit Margaret like blows. Her face went pale. How dare you speak to me that way? I am your mother. I carried you for 9 months. I gave birth to you. But Grace gave us love. Oliver joined in, his voice trembling but determined. Grace remembers our favorite foods and never burns our grilled cheese. Grace helps us with homework and doesn't get impatient when we don't understand math. Grace never misses bedtime stories, even when she's tired. Emma wiped her nose on her sleeve. Grace taught me to braid my hair and tie my shoes. Grace knows I'm scared of the dark and leaves the nightlight on. Grace checks on us 3 times before bed to make sure we're safe. Grace sings the elephant song and knows all the words, Sophie added through tears, holding up her stuffed animal. Mummy doesn't know the elephant song. Richard finally looked up from his phone, sensing the conversation had taken an uncomfortable turn. The children's words painted a picture of his failures as a father. Children, that's enough, he said with hollow authority. Grace is an employee. Employees can be replaced. We'll find someone new, better suited to our needs. Can you be replaced? Oliver asked, with innocent directness. Because Grace does more parent stuff than you do. Grace knows our middle names and favorite colors and what makes us laugh. Do you know those things, Daddy? The question hung in the air. Richard's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. In 6 years, Oliver had never spoken to him so directly, and the simple question cut deeper than any business criticism. Grace gently disentangled herself from the children's embraces and stood up. Maintaining her dignity despite the humiliation, she drew on the strength her grandmother had taught her. I'll pack my things tonight and be gone by morning, Grace said steadily. But before I go, I want you both to know something about your children. Margaret crossed her arms defensively, expecting some farewell speech. These children, Grace continued, looking directly at Margaret and Richard, are the most precious gifts you'll ever receive. They're kind, intelligent, loving, creative and pure-hearted. They have imaginations that can turn cardboard boxes into spaceships and hearts so full of love that they forgive even when hurt. They deserve parents who see them, truly see them, not just when convenient or when you need family photos. Richard's jaw tightened. I don't think you're in any position to lecture us about parenting, Grace. You're just the help. You're absolutely right, Grace replied calmly. I'm not their parent, and I never pretended to be. But for 3 years, I've been their safe harbor when you were too busy for bedtime stories. I've been their cheerleader when you missed school plays for business dinners. I've been their comfort when thunderstorms scared them and you were traveling. Emma tugged on Grace's dress. Tell them about when I fell off my bike. Grace's expression softened. You don't need to. Tell them, Oliver insisted. Tell them what really happened. Grace hesitated, then decided truth was what these children deserved. 6 months ago, Emma fell off her bicycle in the park. She scraped her knee badly and was crying. I called both your phones immediately. Margaret's face began to pale as the memory surfaced. Margaret, you were at your spa appointment and told me to handle it because you couldn't be disturbed. Richard, you were in a board meeting and said you'd call back later. You never did. I took Emma to the emergency room myself, held her hand while they cleaned and bandaged her wound, and stayed with her until she felt better. That's what we pay you for, Margaret said defensively, but her voice lacked conviction. What you pay me for, Grace said quietly, is childcare. But what I gave your children was love. There's a significant difference. Sophie tugged on Grace's dress. Grace, remember when I was sick? Grace's expression grew tender. You had a fever of 103 degrees. I sat by your bed all night, changing cool cloths on your forehead and singing softly so you could sleep. Your parents had a charity gala that night. They checked on you once before leaving. We donated $50,000 to children's cancer research that night, Richard said stiffly. And I'm sure that helped many children, Grace replied. But your daughter needed you here, and I was the one who stayed. Emma stepped forward, processing emotions too complex for her age. Grace, when Mummy and Daddy fight, you're the one who makes us feel safe. Margaret's facade began cracking. We don't fight in front of the children. Yes, you do, Oliver said matter-of-factly. You think we don't hear, but we do. When we get scared because your voices are angry, Grace comes and tells us that sometimes grown-ups have disagreements but still love us. Grace gathered all three children close. Listen to me, my darlings. Your parents love you very much. Sometimes grown-ups get busy and forget to show their love, but that doesn't mean it's not there. But you show us every day, Sophie whispered. That's because loving you three has been the greatest privilege of my life, Grace said, her voice breaking slightly. You've taught me that family isn't just about blood, it's about who shows up, who stays, who cares. Margaret watched this exchange with growing discomfort. Seeing her children's desperate love for this woman forced her to confront truths she had been avoiding. Sweetheart, you can't. This is your home, these are your parents. But we don't want to stay without you, Oliver protested. Who's going to read us stories? Who's going to make our special pancakes? Who's going to remember that I like my bananas cut into circles? Each question was like a dagger to Margaret's heart. She realized she didn't know these details about her own children. Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably. We can hire another nanny, someone more, appropriate. More appropriate how? Grace asked, her dignity unwavering. Someone who will care less, someone who will maintain better boundaries. Someone who won't love your children too much. The questions challenged every assumption the Richardsons had made. We want someone who will maintain professional distance, Margaret said, but the words sounded hollow. Professional distance, Grace repeated slowly. So when Sophie has nightmares at 2 a.m., the new nanny should maintain professional distance. When Oliver struggles with math and gets frustrated, professional distance. When Emma feels left out at school and needs someone to listen, professional distance. Each scenario painted a picture that made Margaret increasingly uncomfortable. She was beginning to realize that what she had interpreted as inappropriate attachment was actually deep, nurturing love. Grace, Sophie said, her small voice cutting through the tension. Will you still love us even if you go away? Grace pulled the little girl close, pressing a kiss to her head. Oh, sweetheart, I will love you three until the day I die and beyond. Distance can't change love. But you need to love your mummy and daddy too. They're learning how to be better parents. They're not very good at it yet, Oliver observed with brutal honesty. Grace looked at Margaret and Richard, her eyes filled with compassion they didn't deserve. Learning takes time. But they love you. Sometimes adults just forget how to show it. Margaret felt tears threatening for the first time in years. Grace, we never meant, Yes, you did, Grace said gently but firmly. You meant to put me in my place. You meant to remind me that I'm the help, not family. And you're right, I am the help. But loving these children isn't something I can turn on and off. Richard ran his hands through his hair, revealing how rarely he found himself at a loss for words. What are we supposed to do now? Be their parents, Grace said simply. Not their schedulers, not their homework supervisors, not their photo opportunities. Be their parents. Learn their favorite songs. Understand their fears. Celebrate their small victories. Show up. Emma wiped her eyes and looked at her mother with surprising seriousness. Mummy, why don't you like Grace? Be their parents, Grace said simply. Not their schedulers, not their homework supervisors, not their photo opportunities. Be their parents. Learn their favorite songs. Understand their fears. Celebrate their small victories. Show up. Emma wiped her eyes and looked at her mother with surprising seriousness. Mummy, why don't you like Grace? Margaret's breath caught. How could she explain jealousy to an 8-year-old? How could she admit that seeing her children's affection for Grace made her feel like a failure? It's not that I don't like her, sweetheart. It's just, complicated. It's not complicated, Oliver said, with startling clarity. You're sad because we love Grace, and you think that means we don't love you. But love isn't like that. Love gets bigger when you share it. The wisdom of a 6-year-old struck Margaret like lightning. She looked at Grace, really looked at her, and saw not a threat but a woman who had loved her children selflessly for 3 years. Grace, Margaret said quietly, I owe you an apology. Grace shook her head gently. You don't owe me anything, Mrs. Richardson, but you owe your children the chance to have the parents they deserve. Parents who are present and engaged and interested in their daily lives. What if, Richard began hesitantly, the words feeling strange in his mouth. What if we tried again? What if we promised to do better? What if we asked you to help us learn how to be the parents our children need? Grace stood up slowly, her decision already forming. That's between you and your children, Mr. Richardson. As for me, I think it's time for me to go. Some things can't be undone with apologies. No. All 3 children cried in unison. Emma grabbed Grace's hand with both of hers. Please don't leave us, please, we promise to be good. We promise not to call you Mama Grace if that makes Mummy sad. Oh, my darling girl, Grace said, kneeling down and cupping Emma's face. You are already good. You're perfect, exactly as you are. You don't need to promise to be better, because you're already the best children anyone could ask for. And leaving you is the hardest thing I'll ever have to do. But sometimes, people need to learn to appreciate what they have by coming close to losing it. Sophie's lower lip trembled. But what if they don't learn? What if they stay busy and sad and angry? Grace looked over the children's heads at Margaret and Richard, seeing the beginning of understanding in their faces. Then you'll know that you have each other, and that's more love than many people ever find. You 3 are a team, and teams take care of each other. Margaret stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. Grace, please, don't go. I need help. I don't know how to be the mother they need. I don't know how to connect with them the way you do. Yes, you do, Grace said with kindness. You just have to start trying. Put down your phone during dinner and ask them about their day. Listen when they talk instead of thinking about your next appointment. Notice when they're sad or scared or excited. Read to them at bedtime. It's not complicated, Margaret. It just requires showing up consistently and caring deeply. Richard looked at his 3 children, really looked at them for what felt like the first time in years, and felt recognition mixed with shame. When had Emma gotten so tall? When had Oliver learned to speak with such wisdom? When had Sophie stopped being a baby? Grace, he said slowly, if you stayed, if we promised to do better, would you help us learn how to be real parents? Grace was quiet for a long moment, considering the children's needs against her own hurt. I'll make you a deal, she said finally. I'll stay for 1 month. 1 month, to see if you can truly change, if you can become the parents these children deserve. But there will be conditions, no negotiable conditions. Margaret nodded eagerly, hope flooding her heart. Anything, we'll agree to anything. First, Grace said with authority, you will spend a minimum of 1 hour each day with your children. No phones, no work calls, no distractions. Just time together talking, playing, reading, being present. Done, Richard said immediately, though part of him wondered how he would manage it. Second, you will learn their routines, their preferences, their fears, and their dreams. You will participate in bedtime stories, help with homework, and be present for their daily lives, not just special occasions. Yes, Margaret whispered, feeling both terrified and excited. Third and most importantly, Grace continued, you will apologize to them, not to me to them. For all the times you chose work over bedtime stories, social events over school plays, and convenience over connection. They deserve to hear that you recognize your mistakes. The silence stretched as Margaret and Richard processed what Grace was asking. Not just behavioral changes, but a fundamental shift in priorities and a humbling acknowledgement of their failures. Finally, Margaret knelt down in front of her 3 children, her designer dress pulling around her on the marble floor. Emma, Oliver, Sophie, Mummy is very, very sorry. I've been a bad mummy, and I want to learn how to be the mummy you deserve. Richard joined her on the floor, his expensive suit wrinkling. Daddy is sorry too. We love you so much, but we forgot how to show you. We got so caught up in our work that we forgot the most important job we have, being your parents. Sophie threw her arms around Margaret's neck, radiating forgiveness. I still love you, Mummy, even when you're sad and angry. Emma hugged Richard tightly. We just wanted you to notice us, Daddy. We wanted you to see us and know us. Oliver looked at Grace with wisdom beyond his years. Grace, you're still going to be our real mum too, right? Even if Mummy and Daddy get better at being parents. Grace smiled through her tears. Love doesn't work in competition, sweetheart. You can love many people, and they can all love you back. Your heart is big enough for everyone who deserves to be there. The following weeks were challenging for everyone in the Richardson household. Margaret struggled to put down her phone during meals, often catching herself reaching for it automatically. Richard found it difficult to leave the office at reasonable hours, but gradually learned that missing a late conference call wouldn't end the world. The children were patient teachers, gently correcting their parents when they slipped into old habits. Grace watched carefully as the family slowly began to transform. She saw Margaret learning to braid Emma's hair, even though it took 20 minutes to do what Grace could accomplish in 5. She observed Richard sitting on the floor with Oliver, actually listening as his son explained complex board game rules. She smiled when she heard Sophie giggling in her parents' bedroom on Saturday mornings, something that had never happened before. There were setbacks, moments of frustration, and times when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. Margaret broke down crying one evening when she realized she didn't know Emma's teacher's name despite her daughter being in the same class for 6 months. Richard felt overwhelmed when Oliver asked for math homework help and he couldn't remember basic multiplication tables. But Grace was there to guide them through each challenge, teaching them that parenting wasn't about perfection, it was about presence, patience, and unconditional love. She showed Margaret how to listen without immediately trying to solve problems. She taught Richard that sometimes children just needed their father to be silly with them, not to teach life lessons. 1 month turned into 2, then 3. The transformation wasn't dramatic or sudden, but it was real. Margaret discovered that Emma's veterinarian dreams weren't just childhood fantasies, but reflected deep compassion for all living things. Richard found that Oliver's seemingly random questions revealed a brilliant, curious mind that thrived on learning. Both parents marveled at Sophie's capacity for joy and her ability to find wonder in the smallest things. The mansion remained the same: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, expensive artwork, but it was no longer cold. It was filled with laughter, with bedtime stories read in silly voices, with pancakes shaped like animals on Sunday mornings, and with the kind of love that money can't buy, but patience and attention can nurture. Grace's role evolved from primary caregiver to family counselor and friend. She still lived with them, still helped with daily routines, but now she was part of a team rather than a solo performer. The children had gained not just better parents, but also retained the woman who had first shown them what unconditional love looked like. Margaret and Richard's marriage improved as well. Learning to connect with their children taught them how to connect with each other. They began having regular conversations that didn't revolve around schedules or finances. They started taking evening walks together after the children were in bed, discussing their dreams and fears for their family's future. The most remarkable change was in the children themselves. They didn't become different people, they had always been wonderful, but they blossomed in the warmth of their parents' newfound attention. Emma's confidence grew as she realized her mother genuinely valued her opinions and dreams. Oliver's creativity flourished when his father began participating in his elaborate storytelling games. Sophie's joyful nature became even more radiant as she basked in the security of having both Grace and her parents fully present. 6 months after that fateful day in the foyer, the Richardson family hosted their first real family dinner. Not a formal affair with hired staff and multiple courses, but a simple meal where everyone helped prepare the food and no phones were allowed at the table. Grace watched from the kitchen doorway as the family she had helped heal shared stories and laughter. Margaret looked up and caught Grace's eye, mouthing thank you with tears. Grace simply nodded and smiled, knowing that her work here was complete not because she was leaving, but because she was no longer needed as a substitute parent. The children finally had the mother and father they deserved. As the months passed, the changes became even more profound. Margaret began volunteering at Emma's school, finally meeting the teacher whose name she had never known. Richard started coaching Oliver's Little League team, discovering his son had inherited his competitive spirit but with a much kinder heart. Sophie's bedtime routine became a family affair, with both parents taking turns singing the elephant song that Grace had taught them. The house that had once echoed with silence and tension now rang with the sounds of a living, breathing family. There were still arguments, still moments of frustration, still times when work threatened to take precedence over family. But now there was also understanding, patience, and most importantly, love that was expressed daily through small acts of attention and care. Grace kept a journal during those transformative months, documenting the small victories and gradual changes. She wrote about the first time Margaret remembered to pack Oliver's lunch exactly the way he liked it. She recorded Richard's proud smile when Emma showed him a good grade on a science test he had actually helped her study for. She noted the evening when Sophie fell asleep in her father's arms while he read her favorite story. Using all the different voices Grace had taught him. 1 year after the confrontation that could have torn the family apart, Grace received an unexpected gift. The Richardson children, with their parents' help, had created a photo album documenting their journey as a family. The first pages showed formal, staged photos from charity events and holidays, beautiful but cold. The later pages were filled with candid shots of bedtime stories, kitchen dance parties, backyard adventures, and quiet moments of connection. On the final page, Emma had written in her careful 8-year-old handwriting, "Thank you, Grace, for teaching us that love grows when you share it, and for showing Mummy and Daddy how to be the parents we always knew they could be." Oliver had added his own message. "You saved our family by never giving up on love, even when love seemed impossible." And Sophie, with help spelling the bigger words, had written, "Grace, you will always be our first mama, the one who showed us what love looks like every day." Margaret and Richard had written their own letter, acknowledging that Grace had given them the greatest gift possible, not just the love of their children, but the knowledge of how to love them back in ways they could feel and understand. Years later, when Emma, Oliver, and Sophie were grown and had children of their own, they would tell their kids about Grace, the woman who saved their family by refusing to let go of love, even when love seemed to have let go of them. They would teach their children that family isn't just about blood or legal documents, but about who shows up, who stays, and who loves you exactly as you are, while helping you become everything you can be. And Grace, now older, but still filled with the same gentle strength that had once stood up to 2 wealthy parents and changed their hearts forever, would smile as she watched her children become loving parents themselves, knowing that love truly does conquer all when people are brave enough to choose it over pride, connection over convenience, and family over everything else that seems important but ultimately isn't. The Richardson mansion still stands today, no longer a cold monument to wealth and status, but a warm home where love grows and flourishes. And sometimes, late at night, if you listen carefully, you can still hear the echo of an elephant song being sung to sleepy children by parents who learned that the greatest gift anyone can give is not expensive toys or fancy clothes, but the simple, powerful act of showing up with love. If this story of transformation and the power of unconditional love touched your heart, Subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us that it's never too late to become the person someone needs you to be, and that the greatest victories aren't won through conflict, but through the patient, persistent power of love that changes hearts, heals families, and creates the kind of happiness that lasts forever.